Now let's look at Husserl's great experiment or great endeavor. Husserl wants to reinstall philosophy as a rigorous science. He calls his own philosophy a rigorous science, strenge Wissenschaft, more rigorous than any science is. So, philosophy as rigorous science. He's not against science. He wants science to become truly scientific. Second, philosophy must be radical. The word radical comes from the word root, radix, really original. And really going to these roots of reality, Husserl says, is a great endeavor. It's bigger than I can achieve. He compared himself. He was a nice guy, but not very modest. I'm like Moses, he said. I'm like Moses. I take you to the promised land, knowing that I will not be able to enter it. He also says philosophy has only one motto: tua res agitur. This really concerns you, your life situation, your world is at stake, not in the sense of that it may perish. Tuas res agitur. This is all about you. And the fourth idea, and this is the most controversial, I call it the wonder of all wonders, and he calls this transcendental subjectivity. There's a difference between the transcendent world, that is the world outside me, transcendent, and transcendental, which means the world that really is presupposed by this world. Transcendental philosophy, in Kantian words, the categories of Kant are an attempt to do transcendental philosophy. But Husserl tries to do something completely different. He is looking for something, and it's not an entity, it's a phenomena. He's going to look for it. The wonder of all wonders, transcendental subjectivity.
Hello, welcome back. I'm Kas Molenaar.
I'm Sonia Schwitz.
And welcome back to First Philosophy. Today we are delving further into the philosophy of Edmund Husserl, as we've just heard.
Yeah, really going to the deep end this time around.
And considering the deep end, you wanted to start with something, I would say, highly conceptual.
Yeah, I'm not going to make it highly conceptual. This is
Good.
not, this is really like kindergarten level. The concept is not, but I'm going to express it in the dumbest way possible.
Which I think, for me as well, would still be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what I wanted to talk about is the last thing that we heard Awee say is transcendental subjectivity, which is many words, many difficult words. Subjectivity, fair enough, whatever. Transcendental, I think maybe we should restate in general what it is about, what it very generally denotes. Transcendental, and I'm reducing a lot once again, is just something. Think of it as something that is beyond, and in this case, beyond the world, beyond the world that we inhabit. Yeah. So this is transcendental is something that I cannot really see maybe properly. I cannot touch it. It is beyond this general milieu. And in that sense, you might already recognize, of course, the word transcendental because we did use it before.
Yes.
Well, Awee did. And we tried parroting it when we were talking about Kant. Kant did the whole thing, well, there is this transcendental thing that presupposes our ability to perceive things.
That is in part of him answering the question, what can I know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Precisely. And in that sense, I just think it's nice to notice this little philosophical lineage that we have going on. Of course, Awee is already painting it with sort of Kierkegaard, Husserl, as going on to Heidegger later, etc., etc. But this is the one that he doesn't acknowledge explicitly, maybe, or hasn't so far. And I think it's nice to point out this, Kant was talking about things that are outside of our worldly experience, in a way. And Husserl, in some ways, in a very, meaningfully different, but in a lot of similar ways, is also talking about it. And I think that is the exciting thing about this episode for us to uncover exactly how his transcendental things
Yeah.
are different from Kant's.
Yeah, and I think to already give a slight peek behind the curtain, I think it is interesting to mention that there is a very strong difference in the interestedness and disinterestedness of both thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
So that for what in Awee's language that he already used in past episodes, that what Kant is doing is cold thinking. So he's really trying to build a scientific system, a system of knowledge. And what Husserl is trying to do is doing something more akin to warm thinking, trying to say this is about you, and this is about this is important to life in a way.
Kas, you said that Kant was doing this more scientific approach, and we'll get back into it, but I would just like to propose that I think Husserl is also not as far from it.
No, yeah, you are right. But I do...
Thank you.
Can we do that again? Because because now I suddenly don't agree with what I said, because I don't think.
And now we're doing real philosophy. The thing is that he does talk more about people. It is warmer, but I think there's a difference between talking about people and being interested in people.
Yeah,
and I think that is where sort of I would put this clarification or this note on what Awee says. It does talk about people, therefore it is more personal and personable, but I think there is still a way to go from this very half clinical approach. It's almost reading Husserl to me, or re-listening to this lecture, is almost trying to witness him break away from this, raging against the machine, raging against it, really trying to overcome something that he rightfully critiques, but coming just a little short, just not quite getting. It is very difficult to break such a way of thinking that is cemented in you. We've just recorded accidentally a half-hour conversation about the interested versus disinterested. We can acknowledge that the intro is short. We can say maybe, once again I'm thinking about being playful with it, being like, we tried. She also has a great tweet. You know the famous Lady Gaga tweet, in Russia doing research?
Yeah.
And that's it. I love it.
That's a very good tweet.
It's so good.
I'm kind of lost in the structure. Just like in the end of I don't know, Interstellar.
We've just recorded accidentally a half-hour conversation about the interested versus disinterested, which is going too fast.
Yeah. So we decided to mention that what Awee is now doing is show that Husserl's motto was, this really concerns you as a human being. Well, philosophy is really about you. And then we would like to come back to that at a later point. After you've listened to more about Husserl and more reading of Husserl's work and Husserl's actual phenomenology and the way he approaches his phenomenology. So
for now, we're just putting a pin in it.
We're putting a pin in it, and we're turning back to the episode.
Welcome to Husserl.
Welcome to First Philosophy.
Okay, let's first look at a fragment from The Crisis of European Science and Transcendental Phenomenology. Husserl is trying to make a distinction in this fragment. The life world, he says, the Lebenswelt, the world we live in, for us who wakingly live in it, is always already there, existing in advance for us. It is the ground of all praxis, whether theoretical or extra-theoretical. The world is pre-given to us, the waking, always somehow practically interested subjects, not occasionally, but always and necessarily, as the universal field of all actual and possible praxis. This is what I call the fullness of contingent unconcealment. Husserl says the world is a universal field of all actual and possible praxis. This is a very, very good sentence, very strong sentence. What the world, this is really thinking about the world. Not as the sum of objects, it is the universal field of all actual and possible praxis. It's a horizon, a constant horizon. But there exists, he proceeds, halfway the text, a fundamental difference between the way we are conscious of the world and the way we are conscious of things or objects. We are conscious, 4 lines below, we are conscious of things as things or objects within the world horizon. Each thing is something of the world in which we are constantly conscious of as a horizon. On the other hand, we are conscious of this horizon only as a horizon for existing objects. So the world does not exist as an entity, not as an object. The world is not an object. It exists with such uniqueness that the plural makes no sense when applied to it. Every plural and every singular drawn from it presupposes the world horizon. The difference between the manner of being of an object in the world and that of the world itself obviously describes fundamentally different correlative types of consciousness for them. So there's 2 kinds of consciousness. Consciousness of things, objects, or people, consciousness of something, Dingbewusstsein, consciousness of something. And there is such a thing as consciousness of the world, which sounds very abstract, but this is the realization that the world is the universal field of all real and possible praxis. There's a difference between them. And now there's a tension, of course, between the two, because if you want to do real philosophy, if you want to go to absolute truth, you would have to search that not in the Dingbewusstsein, not in the consciousness of objects, which is what the natural sciences do, but you have to look for it in this world consciousness. The problem with the world consciousness, on the other hand, is that it's not focused on anything in particular. It's like a meditative phenomena. It's something, but there is such a thing. Let's just agree. I think Husserl is doing real philosophy here. He's doing very good work here. There is a difference, a fundamental difference, me being conscious of this or that object, and me being conscious of the world as the horizon of all, the universal field of all real and possible practices. So how to achieve an encompassing world consciousness? That is the great task. How can we achieve such a thing? And Husserl uses Platonic idiom. He calls it a Wesenschau, an eidetic view. So the essentials of the world he wants to find. So he's already troubling his readers with an idiom of philosophies that we have left behind. How can we reach this world consciousness? And how can we reach true absolute certainties? Now, Husserl is influenced by 2 philosophers, you don't have to remember their names, who he thought really, really discovered something that he can work with. First is Bernard Bolzano. Bernard Bolzano was an early 19th century mathematician and theologian, and he had this question. He was puzzled with something. What is the ontological status? What is the being of numbers? Or, more generally speaking, of all entities of arithmetics and geometry. Take the number 5. Just take the number 5. Where is the number 5? What is the number 5? What is the ontological status, the being of the number 5? Nietzsche would say, well, it's just a construct. It's something that clever beasts, clever animals have invented to make their lives a bit more easy. It's something in your head. And there's a lot of round things, but there's also something like the circle. And the circle, Bolzano says, doesn't really have to exist. I may draw round circles all the time, that they will never equal the real circle, never. There is something like the real circle. Where is it? And Bolzano says, I will not go as far as Plato does and say it's in the ideal world. Let's not do that. But I also don't want to say that it's in our head as a construct. It can't be in our head as a construct because it's too real. There's something too real about it, about the number 5. There's something too real, too evident also about, for instance, 2 + 2 = 4. This is something that is always true, not just in my mind, not just in my head, it's just always true. And Pythagoras' theorem, the sum of the squares of the sides of a right triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse. This goes always. Always. It is certain, beyond spatial temporary worldliness, you might even suggest. 2 + 2 = 4 everywhere. You'll have to invent a multiverse or another world, but it's unthinkable that 2 + 2 will not equal 4. And now here it comes. 2 + 2 = 4 does not give you a feeling of evidence. It gives you evidence itself. So there are some truths in mathematics that are evident in themselves. And Husserl is looking for a real true foundation of philosophy, again, without being metaphysical. He wants to find absolute truth. And he says, here I find something I can work with. I have to make my philosophy comparable to what is happening in the sentence, in the calculation 2 + 2 = 4. It's not a feeling of evidence. It is evident in itself. Second philosopher, Franz Brentano, who contemplated on the concept of intentionality. Now, intentionality is a term that was used in scholastic philosophy, so Christian philosophy, religious philosophy. Intentionality, it was the directedness to the world, and there was a lot of discussions, can I think about God? God is too big and too special and too supreme to even think about. So what is intentionality? What does it mean? Now, Brentano says there's a fundamental difference between intentionality in mental phenomena. The only place where you find intentionality is in our minds, in our consciousness, not in the world. I'll come to it in a second. All mental acts have an intentional object, an intentional content. So, in a judgment, something is judged. In love, something is loved or someone. In hate, someone or something is hated. In imagination, something is imagined. So there's an intentional arc, an intentional directedness between the consciousness and its intentional object. Now, the physical world, Brentano says, lack the ability of original intentionality. Of course, there's gravity and flowers turn themselves to the sun. In his opinion, there is some discussion about it, and especially in a new development in philosophy, object-oriented ontology, which I taught for many years. This is challenged, but let's follow Husserl here and just try to find out what this ontologically means. So there's a directedness to an intentional object. Where is the intentional object? I think of a Mercedes-Benz. It's not in my head. It's outside. Okay, that's one. But I can think of a horse, and I can think of a unicorn. Just follow the experiment. I'm thinking about a horse, and I'm thinking about a unicorn. You may say, and many would agree, the horse may exist. The unicorn is a mythical figure. It doesn't exist in reality. But if you look at the intentionality in the intentional act, it doesn't matter whether the object exists. So here, Husserl has the solution to all his problems, his first intuition. This is what happens. Consciousness is always directed in an act, intentional act, towards an intentional object. But this intentional object does not necessarily have to exist in the outside world. We could bracket it. We could put it into parentheses. Because it could be a unicorn that I'm thinking of. It could be a horse. It's still the same. So something strange happens here. For Husserl, something very, very, very worthwhile happens here, that the intentional object we are not forced to proclaim whether the intentional object exists or doesn't exist. So even the problem of numbers is solved here. I'm thinking about the number 5. And whether the number 5 exists is not really, we're not going into ontological, metaphysical discussions here. Husserl says, no, I'm just telling you what's happening. There's the intentionality of consciousness towards its intentional objects, which may or may not exist in the outside world.
We just heard the first part of an extremely, I think, conceptually dense lecture. I think maybe this is the most conceptually dense it gets within this course. So please, absolutely no panic about not understanding it. I feel like no one does at this point. But I would like to just quickly go over what the hell is metaphysics? What the hell is ontology? And metaphysics is a more general sphere that just generally talks about things that are above physical, right? So it's a wider sphere of things. Everything that is not a lived experience could fall under metaphysics. Ontology is a more specific thing where we're not just talking about anything that is metaphysical. We're talking about being, onto, right? The existence.
Ontos is the Greek word for being.
Exactly. So maybe with this basic knowledge, if you were lost up till now, I hope to have provided some relief for that. It's really not difficult.
No, and something that can also maybe help to further clarify the distinction is that for a very long time, this is now a history in philosophy, for a very long time, there was no difference between being a scientist or being a philosopher. Like there was philosophy of nature is basically what either biologists or physicists are now doing. And I think a huge part of what we now call metaphysics is also attempts at physics. So there is like an entire system to explain what we now could explain with gravity, which is now put into the category of metaphysics because it is something metaphysical, an attempt at philosophy, which is in itself can be very interesting, but was an attempt at science, was an attempt at explaining things that couldn't be just understood or couldn't be just easily explained.
Yeah.
And in preparation for this episode, we talked about Husserl and our experiences with Husserl, and we both realized that he is actually easier to understand than you might think at first glance.
Yeah. There is just something about it that makes you think that there is more there than it is, so you keep trying to find it.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because you can't, because maybe it's not actually there. You're reading too much into it.
Yeah. And I think a part of that is the language.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in previous episodes, so we should not spend too much time on this. But if you hear a phrase or a word that you do not understand, that is the experience of philosophy. That happens a lot. Stick with it and look it up. Because I think I eventually got really stuck in reading Husserl because, to be completely honest, I was not looking up all the words and I was kind of guessing what they might mean and then hoping that I was right and then continuing and reading. Husserl is not the thinker to do that with.
No, absolutely.
With some thinkers you can get kind of get away with that and they don't keep on using the same words to build up a system. Husserl does. And
to return to something that we have foreshadowed, so to speak. Alluded to, indeed, in the beginning, is the question of just how interested or disinterested Husserl's philosophy is.
Yeah.
Because it has been posited as warm. Awee talks about it.
Yeah.
Husserl says, this concerns you.
Yeah.
I'm pretty staunchly of the opinion that Husserl is still stuck in something that I for myself call math envy. He keeps talking about this is this is not science, but this is more rigorous than science. That, to me, there is this failure of actually detaching himself from this aspiration to be not different from, but better at the same criterion of science, you know?
Reading Husserl is difficult, and he is definitely being very rigorous and very strict about these kind of things. It is, I think, biographically correct that he was envious of the foundations of logics and mathematics.
Yeah.
So for him, he wanted to have like logics, mathematics, and phenomenology. That everyone can agree, whether you do physics, whether you do math, those are all the things that we can agree upon. So yeah, I kind of agree, but that was not to be reductive. Like the criticism of all the other sciences in Husserl's view is that they're all expanding in completely different branches and not in any way relating anymore.
Sure.
Because they're creating a different language. So he has to be very rigorous in his eyes. I'm not necessarily defending him, but he has to be very rigorous and very cold and very mathematic about the approach to then show the possible fullness of things.
Yeah, but the thing is that in fullness, I understand what he's doing, and I'm not against it.
No.
But the fullness loses particularity. And to me, that means that it does not actually concern you, because you're never, and I understand, and this is not to say that Husserl is a bad philosopher. This is just, I feel, this is just a fundamental thing because of my worldview, my philosophical interest, etc. I think it is fair to say that it's warm science, and I believe that Husserl did intend for it to concern you, and he did believe in it. I think it's still, it misses the trees for the forest, or the forest for the trees, whatever they say, I forget. You know, it still is too stuck in the abstract.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think he could have done it any different. I think.
Someone had to start it. I mean, we will see, I think, in the lineage, how it, almost with like every successive philosopher that Awee talks about, it's like they keep getting it more and more and more, like the attitude that I'm describing and that I'm desiring.
And it's also not a coincidence that this lecture series ends with Levinas.
That's true, my favorite. One of them. So I agree with you. I think someone had to start, and you can't immediately get somewhere where it took generations of philosophers to get.
Yeah, and in the next section, one of the first things Awee will mention is that this specific phenomenological approach, which is not his phenomenological approach. So there are phenomenological approaches, plural.
Yeah.
And I mean, the very first, very famous phenomenologist that comes after Husserl, which will be the next episode, immediately does something completely different with the foundation of phenomenology. Yeah. So there are other ways possible. There are maybe better ways possible. But to have this project kicked off by anyone, I do think that this rigidness, this coldness, this math envy was absolutely necessary, and it's the only way to actually take the step back, right? That is it's taking a step back and then looking at it again from a different perspective.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think no matter whether I think it's done well, it's necessary and important, and what I think was done well definitely would never happen if it wasn't for this. No, let's acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Let's acknowledge it.
I agree. It isn't necessary in a way that history had to develop in this specific way and that nothing could ever have changed. No. And this was the only way it could have happened. What I'm saying is that if you want to have a phenomenology that can also acknowledge a more full life and also talk about life in a different way, I think actually really stepping back and really trying to build the foundations for a new philosophy, a first philosophy, you could not do it in a different way than with a very rigorous and maybe cold math envy approach. Because Husserl will also, at the end of his life, Awee will say this towards the end, I believe, but state that his mission didn't succeed.
Yeah.
And almost every phenomenologist after him does something very different.
Yeah. And I mean, as our lovely producer rightfully pointed out, I think it is important for us to acknowledge that and remind everyone that we are firmly talking about Western philosophy.
Yes.
This discussion is extremely limited in scope, and that is something worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Kas just refused to say the segue joke that we've prepared because he's too self-conscious about being a white cis guy. So I'm going to say it.
Thank you very much.
As a white cis woman who is Jewish, still white, Ashkenazi. So the segue is, and now we go back to Western philosophy.
Now, to really reach what he calls the phenomenological attitude, which is not what I understand with the phenomenological attitude, but I highly, highly respect what Husserl is doing. There's a phenomenological attitude which tries to dwell upon this phenomena of the acts of consciousness. But science doesn't have anything to do with phenomenology or this attitude. Science has the natural attitude. So let's first look at the natural attitude. This is the attitude that you are, if you study science at EUR, are all educated within. And even if you study philosophy, some of my colleagues would say, I'm educating you into the natural attitude. So there's the natural attitude. The natural attitude is this: steadily progressing in learning more and more about the surrounding world, trying to find as much knowledge as possible about our surrounding world. Now, in his ideas pertaining to a pure phenomenology and to a phenomenological philosophy, Husserl starts to think about this. He kicks off with dwelling on the idea of the natural attitude, paragraph 30, page 56. I just read what he says. As what confronts me, I continually find the one spatio-temporal actuality to which I belong, like all other human beings, who are to be found in it and who are related to it as I am. He's trying to give a positive, a very optimistic, a very respectful definition of the natural attitude. No doubt about or rejection of data belonging to the natural world alters in any respect the general positing which characterizes the natural attitude. The world is always there as an actuality. Here and there it is at most otherwise than I supposed. This or that is, so to speak, to be struck out of it and given such title as illusion or hallucination. To cognize the world more comprehensively, more reliably, more perfectly in every respect than naive experiential cognizance can, to solve all the problems of scientific cognition, which offer themselves within the realm of the world, that is the aim of the sciences belonging to the natural attitude. I don't think any scientist would disagree. Any scientist would say that's in fact what we do, whether it's a medical professional or a natural science professional. This is what we do. We try, our aim is to become more comprehensively, more reliably, more perfectly in every respect than naive experiential cognizance can. I give you an example. A couple of years ago, I lived in an apartment, And I was hanging over the railing and I was looking outside, and all of a sudden I felt rain. I thought it was raining. God damn, it's raining again. So I looked up, but it was my 5 little neighbor boys who were pissing down from the balcony. True story. So I found out it wasn't raining, it was those damn kids again. This is the natural attitude. Constantly improving your knowledge of the world. Now, Husserl says, let's do something completely different. Paragraph 31. A radical alteration of the natural positing, excluding, parenthesizing. And he says, instead of remaining in this attitude, we propose to alter it radically. What we now must do is to convince ourselves of the essential possibility of the alteration in question. And he first starts thinking about Descartes, who doubted everything, doubted the world, and he says Descartes is exaggerating. Descartes doubts everything. We shouldn't doubt everything. That's not the point. The point is that we have to find a different attitude, a different approach. And this different approach is we single out only the phenomenon of parenthesizing or excluding from what Descartes called doubt. He says, all I'm doing is parenthesizing. So we can quite freely, at the bottom of page 59, we can quite freely exercise this peculiar epoché. He uses the word from the Greek Stoic tradition. Epoché means refraining from judgment, postponing your judgment. We can exercise this peculiar epoché, a certain refraining from judgment, which is compatible with the unshaken conviction of truth, even with the unshakable conviction of evident truth. So the sciences are still there. The sciences are still there. Paragraph 32. What I'm going to do, he says, I'm going to parenthesize every objectivity. Alles tussen haken zetten. That's all I'm going to do. Our purpose is to discover a new scientific domain, one that is to be gained by the method of parenthesizing, which therefore must be a definitely restricted one. And here I read what he says about what is happening. Top of 61. We put out of action the general positing which belongs to the essence of the natural attitude. We just put it out of action. So the whole natural world, which is continually there for us, on hand, and which will always remain there according to consciousness as an actuality, even if we choose to parenthesize it. If I do this, as I can with complete freedom, all I do is parenthesizing, I am not negating this world as though I were a sophist. I'm not negating the world. I am not doubting its factual being as though I were a skeptic. Rather, I'm exercising the phenomenological epoché, which also completely shuts me off from any judgment about spatio-temporal factual being. Thus, I exclude, that's all. I exclude all sciences relating to this natural world, no matter how firmly they stand there for me, no matter how much I admire them, no matter how little I think of making even the least objection to them. I make absolutely no use of the things posited in them. So this is not an animosity. This is not being against science at all. Husserl is just saying, I'm not going with science. It's just the natural attitude. Keep on going. Do what you will. I'm doing something else. I'm just parenthesizing. I'm excluding everything you're saying, everything you're doing, and I'm trying to find out what is left. What is really happening here? And Husserl comes to a very difficult experiment in which he says, this is difficult to follow, and I'll just tell it because I have to tell it. It's what he wrote, but it doesn't sound very strong. He says, if I do this, parenthesize the whole world, I could even come to the conclusion that the world does not even exist. He calls this the annihilation of the world. I can do a thought experiment in which nothing exists, but then still there will be the acts of the consciousness directed towards it. Consciousness doesn't need a real world to be conscious. Of course, this is not convincing at all. It's a strange thought experiment, and this is not what I would consider convincing. But for Husserl, the most important conclusion of this experiment is that there's a veritable abyss, bottom of 111, between consciousness and reality. Here, an adumbrated being, so a being with also all kinds of shadows, shadowings and aspects, not capable of ever becoming given absolutely, merely accidental and relative. There, a necessary and absolute being, essentially incapable of becoming given by virtue of adumbration and appearance. And then he asks himself, what is left if I do this? I do the phenomenological epoché. I'm just not taking anything for granted that science tells me. I put it between brackets. I just think my thoughts. And then he says, what have I got left if I do this? What is the phenomenological residuum? Well, the phenomenological residuum is this. That, page 113, last page. That's what is left as the sought for phenomenological residuum. Though we have excluded the whole world with all physical things, living beings and humans, ourselves included, strictly speaking, we have not lost anything, but rather have gained the whole of absolute being, which, rightly understood, contains within itself, constitutes within itself all worldly transcendences. Now, this is a very, very strange thing to say. So according to Husserl, if you do this phenomenological epoché, you end up with a phenomenological residue, which is pure consciousness, transcendental subjectivity, which thinks its thoughts. Normal people in philosophy would say this is a radical idealism. This is idealism. There's only Husserl uses the words ego cogito cogitata. Consciousness thinks its own thoughts. But according to Husserl, he has not lost anything. He has found the whole world. So what is he doing? And he says, I'm not against science, I'm just not using science. And if I do this, for instance, I can really understand the past, I can really understand even the future in the acts of what he calls Erfüllung, fulfillment. So what is happening? Consciousness thinks all real and possible worlds. So in my retention, in thinking about the past, I do not only think everything that has happened, but I also think everything that could have happened. Looking at the future, I'm not only constituting in potention, I'm not only constituting what might happen or what is probable to happen, but also what may happen, really in a radical sense. And Husserl just gave classes on very ordinary things, a letterbox in the street. For 4 hours, he would talk about it. He would talk about this fine piece of furniture. Well, I don't call it fine at all, but he would talk about this for hours, and he would say, all we can see, science can see, is Abschattungen, is aspects of it. We can only see aspects of it. So we will never really get to the essence or what this thing really is. Only by really in consciousness, constituting all these real and possible aspects, I will find what this thing is. Take a chair. If I bracket, I see a chair, I bracket the chair, and according to Husserl, if I really let my transcendental subjectivity do the work, I will constitute all real and possible chairs. So I will constitute the IKEA chair, I will constitute the Rietveld armchair, I will constitute all real and possible worlds. This is the real aim of what Husserl calls pure phenomenology. This is what we should do. And Husserl had a lot of assistants. Eugen Fink, Edith Stein was an assistant of him for a while, who were working with him on this phenomenal project of writing a phenomenology of everything that would really address everything in its fullness. And now, Husserl was Jewish. He was threatened by the Nazis, and he died in 1938. So fortunately, he didn't have to go through the ordeal that so many other Jewish people had to go through. And he wrote in shorthand, very unreadable. And a famous priest, von Breda, managed to get all these writings of Husserl and took it to Leuven, in Belgium, where still in the Husserl archive, something to go to. It's place of pilgrimage for some people. They are still deciphering Husserl's transcripts, Husserl's writings. They're still trying to find what Husserl has meant. But many, many, many people have said, Husserl, you just went too far. It's not going to work. And the one thing, and I'm choosing the most fierce criticism of Husserl to try to show you how impressive Husserl really is, whether this whole philosophy can be done or cannot be done. It's very important to realize how impressive Husserl's thinking is. It's the phenomena of intersubjectivity. Critics of Husserl said, this is terrible. You bracket the whole world. All you have is you thinking your thoughts. So you will never meet another person. And Husserl even had the idiom of an other person as an alter ego. So his critics said, now I got you, an alter ego, so that someone like you, all you can do in your Erfüllung, in your fulfillment, in your constituting acts, you can only, from the narrow perspective that you have as a person, constitute the other. You will never reach the other. You will never come to what the other is as another, because you are locked in your own little world. And here is exactly why Husserl is so bloody important. Because what is happening? I'm parenthesizing. I'm parenthesizing the other as this other, whom I see with my own personal perspectives and my moods and my idiosyncratic perspectives and everything. But I'm parenthesizing the natural attitude. So I'm also parenthesizing my natural ego. I'm parenthesizing myself as a person with moods. So I'm no longer thinking as an ego, as a psychological ego. No, I'm thinking as a transcendental subject. And this transcendental subject, and this is the task, is constituting, is imagining, is thinking the other in all his or hers real and possible aspects. So this is true intersubjectivity, that you no longer keep on being stuck in your own little world and then have to find a bridge to someone else. No, this is intersubjectivity to the full. I really constitute the other, not as the way I perceive him or her from my limited perspective, because I also bracket myself. So this bracketing, and of course everything boils down to transcendental subjectivity. There's where the whole trouble starts. What is transcendental subjectivity? Do we all have it? Is it somewhere in us? It can't be consciousness, because that's what to be bracketed. So transcendental, all Husserl's later writings are attempts to articulate what this transcendental subjectivity is. Do we all have one? How do we have one? We are finite people. So he started exploring ideas like there is something like a world consciousness in each and every one of us. And mind you, Husserl had many students from the East, from the Orient, Japanese and Chinese students. They were fascinated with him because in their philosophy, something like a world consciousness that we are all just a small part of is actually something that they could relate to, that they could understand. They thought, this is really what we also are talking about.
We've heard another extremely dense explication.
Yeah.
And I've cursed myself to keep explaining concepts for some reason during this episode, and no one stopped me, which I think is a bit sexist. Letting women do all the work. But I'm taking it upon myself. To maybe reiterate.
I feel so awkward.
But I'm taking it upon myself to start just rephrasing what epoché is a little bit, because I think it's a very dense and very difficult part of it. And to make it less intimidating, once again, I'm reminding everyone that it's not as difficult as it seems. It seems like there is more. There really isn't. This thought experiment, so to speak, is not there to prove some content that you have to get. It's just there. It's basically like that exercise of what constitutes a sentence. When you keep taking letters, words out of a sentence, and you're left with just a noun. And like if I remove this noun, then the sentence ceases to exist. So now you found the ground level from which a sentence could be started.
Yeah.
And this is what Husserl does.
Yeah.
If I drain everything as much as I can, what remains? What can I rely upon? What is my ground on which I build everything else? That is what the epoché is. It's taking the words out of a sentence and see where do you have to stop.
Yeah. But also it would then, a part of that answer would be, if you end at that noun, it would also to redo that experiment and then see if you can do it with other words as well.
Yeah.
Because that will be part of the essential sentence. So can you do it with a noun? Can you do it with anything else? And it is very similar to what Descartes also does with his methodological doubt, which is like in 3 steps. First, I'm doubting my perception. Then I'm doubting whether I'm awake. And then I'm doubting whether logic and maths is even true. And then he comes to the conclusion, well, if someone is being tricked into believing all these things, it is still someone. So, and I'm doubting it. So I'm thinking, I think, and therefore I am.
Yeah. It's basically just a remix of how you can try achieve this.
Yeah, and it is not coincidental that one of the more famous books by Husserl is called The Cartesian Meditations. He is kind of shifting the steps around if you read the book. So I think he starts at not at perception necessarily, but at dreaming or whatever. He kind of shuffles the order of the experiment around. But he does something very, very similar. However, with epoché, you keep that is like putting things between brackets. You keep the things between brackets, and you are also aware that you're keeping these things between brackets. So that is what Descartes is really saying. Oh, I know nothing. I have cut off all the foundations of my knowledge. So I have to begin anew, and that is never what Husserl does. He's always still aware of that between brackets. And in that regard, I find it a very fair and very honest approach of philosophy. And it is also something that you can, like if we would both practice phenomenology and we would both write something and say, oh, we have done this completely phenomenological, we've studied something, and we read each other's approach or each other's attempt, you can say, oh, but here some bias or presupposition has kind of slipped in. Maybe this is not necessarily the way it has to be. Maybe this could also be in a different way.
Right.
Which we talked about Havi Karel earlier, who's a modern day phenomenologist who wrote a very good book, The Phenomenology of Illness. And throughout phenomenology, there have been made some perceptions about the body and the way the body moves. And Havi Karel writes that this is not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily essential to the way a body lives in the world, because a body can also be ill. And that has been forgotten in these approaches. So in that sense, it is also a philosophy that is open to soft criticisms. Yeah,
it allows you in a way to retain your biases. It merely asks you to allow for the others to also exist and to be proven wrong.
Yeah. Which I think is a really nice way of practicing philosophy.
Yeah, and in a way really walks the talk of what we've been saying a lot about being humble and being open with the phenomenological approach.
Yeah. Because Awee calls this intersubjectivity to the full.
He does. I don't really agree with it. I have difficulty with it. It's once again, as we've discussed, I appreciate what is being done. You and I talked about why this is important and why it maybe was difficult to do otherwise.
Yeah.
But I do not think that I even question to what extent it can be called intersubjectivity. you can't do intersubjectivity if you don't have subjects that are different, you know? Because we're asking to bracket and regard everyone in universality. That is a way of thinking of people, of getting rid of biases, etc., etc. It does a lot. But I think what it does not do is it does not allow for several subjects to exist, for more than one universal subject to exist, which is why I think I'm having difficulties with agreeing with what Awee is saying. And and Awee, of course, also said that this is not particularly how he would do phenomenology.
No.
So I think he's being very generous. Yeah, I agree way more with, I disagree with Husserl, not with Awee necessarily. And if anything, I commend Awee on how generous he is at presenting Husserl, even though he did let us know that maybe this is not what Awee would say himself.
Yeah, and what I think also speaks to that is that we kind of disagree on how beautiful Husserl's philosophy is in itself, but one thing that we can agree on is that it is very, very difficult to read Husserl.
Yes.
Like it is not. Some phenomenology is almost, to me, poetry.
Yeah.
It is, and for some people that's a criticism. For me, it's definitely not. Like, it's beautifully written philosophy and also very important philosophy. But Husserl is definitely not in the category of beautiful poetic philosophy. He doesn't need to be, but the way Awee is presenting Husserl in this lecture is in a very, very beautiful way, and I think that is a very impressive feat, and it might have colored my view of Husserl a little bit.
Yeah,
but I understand what you're saying. The thing that I do find very beautiful is seeing the alter ego. So you begin with, in his phenomenology, there is this transcendental ego, which is...
should we acknowledge the rain?
Acknowledge the rain.
I'm acknowledging the rain. We apologize for this. And we're in the Netherlands, and now it's November, and it will keep on raining. So.
Yeah, I'm very enthusiastic about the concept of putting quite big skylights in a podcast studio. I think that's a very good move. Sitting directly above our microphones are two very big windows.
Yeah.
So this will keep going.
10 hours YouTube video, 10 hours of rain and philosophical discussion.
Which you will definitely not fall asleep to. But what is really nice in... what I think is really nice in Husserl's philosophy is you have the transcendental ego, the transcendental subject, which then encounters in their phenomena, they encounter the unother. And this is part of the ego. It is the alter ego. It is the ego that is different to me or perceived to be different than me. But in this part, in the phenomenology of Husserl, you have not even proven the fact that there are others. So you cannot, you cannot just wing that. Okay, fine, there are others, by the way. So that has to be rigorously built up. And in that sense, that eventually the other is such a confrontation with my ego, in a sense that this other is incomprehensible for me in a way.
You're skipping to Levinas.
Am I?
Yes, this is Levinas.
I think this is in the Cartesian meditation. Having the alter ego being very alter, being different, is eventually the recognition that this isn't all just in me. This isn't a closed-off system in which I am the only one with experience. This isn't, to say it philosophically, solipsism.
Yeah, okay.
And this experience with the other as the other is something that is so... Well, you can see it say the other is strange or weird and I don't get the other, which is a more negative-loaded interpretation, which I don't agree with and I don't think Husserl would say. Or as the other as something that is so profoundly different. And this is going towards Levinas, and Levinas does this in a way more profound, a very difficult, but very beautiful way.
Thinking of others as alter egos is catastrophic for Levinas.
Yeah, which we will see in a few upcoming episodes. There's the other as someone who has so much potential to be other. I do think is still very, very beautiful, and maybe this is a too generous reading of Husserl. If so, I will concede. But I do really like this.
Point taken. It's a great reading. I'm not against it. I just don't partake in it.
No, absolutely fair enough.
Whatever you do in your bedroom doesn't concern me.
And it is a lot of Husserl. I'm bracketing.
And we're going back to less obscene things again and letting Awee peacefully finish this lecture. Thank you for bearing with us.
But Husserl got more and more disappointed. He once wrote, "The dream is dreamt. My dream is gone. It can't be done." Still, many people are still working on this. And Husserl is right now specifically famous for his rethinking the natural attitude and its limits. That's the inspiration that most people get from. But also the idea of intentionality. You find it in Heidegger, you find it in Sartre, you find in Merleau-Ponty, but different approaches to it. This intentionality, this is where there lies the key to a new kind of philosophy. But again, many critics say it's impossible, and I will come back to it at the beginning of the class on Thursday on Heidegger. It's impossible to find this transcendental subjectivity. It's too much to think. Mind you, I still have students every year who graduate with me on Husserl. And the PhD students even, they say, still have to do this because Husserl is still, I gave you the example of intersubjectivity, but also in the realm of interculturality, Husserl may be a very important voice where you bracket your own perceptions on another culture. So if you're a Christian person and you bracket all your positions, you will find a completely different approach to when you talk to someone from the Islam or another culture. If you bracket and we'll come back to this in the class on Gadamer, there is something so inspirational in this idea of bracketing the natural attitude. Bracketing the natural attitude. This is what I call stirring thinking. Bracketing the natural attitude, this all too evident attitude, and explore other ways of thinking. For Husserl maybe went a bridge too far. He tried for something he never realized, but this inspiration, this idea of bracketing all theories that seem so evident and really trying to find more radical ways of exploring the world is an inspiration that could, for me, still lasts a lifetime. I'll see you Thursday on Heidegger. Thank you.